INFJs have a quiet, yet piercing ability to dismantle egos with surgical precision. They don't do it with loud arguments or visible aggression. Instead, it happens through calm confrontation, soulful insight, and a strange, unsettling clarity that disarms the most confident facades. The INFJ's strength lies in their depth of perception. They observe people keenly, not just what they say, but how they say it, the silences in between, the inconsistencies they try to hide. INFJs seem to see through the performance. When someone boasts, lies, or exaggerates to protect their image, the INFJ notices. Not because they're trying to expose anyone, but because their minds are wired to scan beneath the surface. They read emotional subtext like most people read headlines. Check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. Egos are fragile constructs. They thrive on validation, dominance, control, and being seen in a certain light. INFJs don't feed egos, at least not unconsciously. While they can play the role of a gentle supporter, once they sense manipulation or pride hiding behind false humility, their demeanor changes subtly. They begin to mirror back the truth, not with cruelty, but with a clarity that feels like holding up a spiritual mirror. That reflection can be painful. They don't need to shout or scold. They just tell the truth, softly but unmistakably. And often, it's a truth the other person has been avoiding. INFJs are not easily intimidated. Their calm, thoughtful energy unnerves people who rely on power or charm to control interactions. An ego expects resistance it can fight or praise it can absorb. But what INFJs offer is something deeper and more neutral, a kind of unshaken awareness. It's like trying to impress someone who sees right past the performance. That alone can crack the shell of a bloated ego. They also ask the kind of questions that pull the curtain back. Simple questions like, why do you think that matters to you? Or is that really who you are? Or who you've learned to be? These aren't accusations, they're invitations. But to someone guarding a fragile self-image, they feel like a quiet dismantling. Not because INFJs are trying to wound, but because they don't play along with illusions. Their emotional intuition doesn't let them. There's also an uncanny way INFJs withdraw their energy when someone's ego becomes too loud. They'll listen, nod, but offer no fuel, no validation, no resistance. And suddenly, the person boasting or dominating starts to feel exposed. Empty. It's like shouting into a cave and hearing no echo. That void forces self-reflection. Without saying much, INFJs can create space where ego falls silent and the real self is left blinking in the light. What makes their ego dismantling so profound is that it's not driven by malice. INFJs genuinely want to connect with the real person underneath. They aren't interested in performances. They crave authenticity, and they quietly call others into it, sometimes against their will. The result is that those who cling tightly to status, control, or false confidence often feel unsettled by INFJs. They feel seen in a way they're not ready for. And when an INFJ finally decides to speak, when they do put words to what they see, it lands like thunder after a long silence. They may be soft-spoken, but their truths cut through illusion like light through mist. And the most striking part, they usually walk away with no need to gloat or revisit the scene. They don't destroy egos to win. They do it by simply refusing to see anything less than the truth. And in the presence of that kind of honesty, ego has nowhere left to hide. What truly sets the INFJ apart in their ability to dismantle egos is their paradoxical blend of softness and depth. They are empaths, but not the type who get swept up in other people's emotional dramas. Instead, they observe with compassionate detachment, seeing people not just as they are, but as who they pretend to be. This dual vision, of the mask and the soul beneath, gives them an almost prophetic insight that ego cannot endure for long. Ego, by nature, thrives in environments of superficiality. It draws its strength from applause, status, and the illusion of being in control. But INFJs don't operate in those spaces. They prefer conversations that dig, moments that unravel, truths that burn clean. While others may play along to keep things light or polite, INFJs carry a different agenda, one rooted in uncovering what's real. That reality check is often unsettling to someone clinging to an inflated sense of self. The INFJ's words are chosen with care, but make no mistake, they're powerful. When an INFJ challenges your actions or motives, it doesn't come across like criticism. It feels like a divine whisper in your conscience, one that you can't unhear. They may say something as simple as, "I wonder what you're trying to prove," and it will echo for days. Their feedback isn't about surface behavior. It touches the very why behind it, and it lingers. What makes this so disarming is that INFJs do not aim to embarrass or humiliate. They aren't interested in taking down someone's pride for sport. On the contrary, they often hope to lift people into self-awareness. But that elevation only happens when the layers of ego are stripped away, and few people are ready for that. The INFJ just happens to do it without needing to raise their voice or claim moral superiority. Their very presence acts as a filter. Inauthenticity can't breathe in their energy. INFJs are also deeply secure in themselves, not always in the conventional, loud way, but in a quiet, spiritual way that unnerves the insecure. They don't need external validation to know who they are. That centeredness alone can shake the foundations of someone used to measuring worth by how loudly they speak, how many people follow, or how impressive their image seems. When faced with someone who simply is, without trying to prove anything, the ego begins to panic. And INFJs don't rush. They let people talk. They let the ego perform. They give it room. But they're always watching, waiting, not to attack, but to reflect. The longer someone tries to impress them, the more obvious it becomes that it's not working. The INFJ doesn't challenge egos with confrontation. They challenge egos with presence. They sit in their truth so fully that the facade of others begins to crack under the weight of authenticity. When they do choose to confront, they often do so gently but directly. There's no fluff, no distraction, just truth, layered in empathy but impossible to dodge. Their tone won't escalate, but the substance will deepen. They might say, "You speak a lot about your achievements, but not much about what fulfills you." And suddenly the entire mask of bravado loses its shine. But perhaps the most powerful way INFJs destroy egos is through silence. Not passive silence, but intentional, knowing silence. When someone is performing, inflating, or posturing, and the INFJ chooses not to engage, not to nod, not to challenge, not to feed, it becomes glaring. The performance collapses on its own. Silence becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the person is forced to face themselves without applause or resistance. The reason INFJs are so adept at unraveling egos lies not only in what they see, but in what they refuse to believe. They have an uncanny resistance to surface charm, bravado, and emotional manipulation. Where others may be dazzled by charisma or status, the INFJ remains unmoved. They are not fooled by beautiful lies or grand performances. In fact, the more elaborate the mask, the more clearly they perceive the fear and insecurity it was built to hide. Check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. To the INFJ, ego is not a villain, but a wounded child dressed in armor. And while others may fall for the armor, INFJs intuitively tune into the tremble in the voice, the flicker of insecurity in the eyes, the subtle inconsistencies between what a person says and how they feel. These things don't escape their notice. They absorb emotional data, like a sponge, silently, without announcing it. So when they speak, it often feels like they're reaching into your private journal and reading aloud the words you never dared to write. What makes INFJs especially dangerous to unchecked egos is that they're not confrontational by nature, but they are relentless seekers of truth. They won't start a fire, but if they find one burning beneath your words, they will ask what it's consuming. They won't rip your mask off, but they will stare at it long enough that you begin to wonder whether you need it at all. And once you begin to question it, the unraveling has already begun. Their presence alone is a kind of subtle judgment, not because they are judgmental, but because they are so inwardly aligned that anything fake or inflated feels exposed in their company. They don't chase attention. They don't dominate conversations. They don't try to be the smartest or loudest in the room. And yet, their quiet authenticity becomes a mirror that forces others to reckon with how much of their behavior is performative. Egos don't know what to do with people who cannot be manipulated. The more someone tries to impress or intimidate the INFJ, the more indifferent the INFJ becomes. That indifference is surgical. It tells the ego, I see you trying, but I'm not moved. And when an ego feels unseen or unimpressive, it starts to panic. It either shrinks into silence or lashes out in desperation. INFJs have seen both reactions, and they respond with the same calm clarity that unravels both. What's terrifying to an ego is the INFJ's refusal to argue. They don't need to win. They don't seek to dominate. They let others talk, boast, brag, while quietly examining the wiring underneath. When they do respond, it's not with volume, but with precision. They don't speak often, but when they do, their words carry the weight of deep thought and emotional insight. And that kind of truth, wrapped in softness but sharpened by soul, is impossible to defend against. Even their compassion is disarming. INFJs see the ego for what it is, a defense mechanism, a costume worn for protection. And while others may attack the mask or mock the performance, INFJs often speak to the person behind it. That's where the real destruction happens. When they bypass your mask and speak directly to your soul, you feel naked. And not because they stripped you, but because they reminded you of who you were before you started pretending. Sometimes, the INFJ's ego dismantling doesn't happen through confrontation at all. It happens through radical, unwavering authenticity. They simply live as themselves, with depth, intention, and emotional honesty. And that can be threatening to people whose identities are built on performance. Watching someone move through the world without needing applause or validation creates a crisis for those who've never felt secure without it. The ego begins to question its entire foundation. In romantic relationships, friendships, and even professional settings, INFJs can end up being mirrors that others either cling to or run from. Some people feel healed in their presence, while others feel exposed. And the difference lies in how tightly the ego is being held. Those willing to let go find peace with the INFJ. Those unwilling to face themselves often label the INFJ as too intense, too deep, or too much, when in reality, it's their own inner shallowness gasping for air. The INFJ does not destroy the ego with violence. They destroy it with truth, with silence, with questions, with presence. They don't demand the mask be removed, but they make it impossible to keep wearing. And when the ego finally shatters, the person underneath is not condemned. They are invited, gently, quietly, lovingly, to step into who they truly are. Ego thrives in performance. INFJs dismantle ego by refusing to applaud the performance. They don't offer the expected nods of agreement when someone boasts. They don't get emotionally manipulated by sob stories, told for sympathy rather than healing. They have a built-in filter for authenticity. And when that filter senses dishonesty or emotional inflation, the INFJ doesn't attack. They simply disengage. That lack of validation, subtle but total, is one of the sharpest tools they wield. To someone who feeds off approval, the INFJ's silence feels like starvation. But it's not just silence. It's contrast. The INFJ themselves is often deeply authentic, even when it costs them comfort. They admit to their flaws. They talk about things that matter. They bring up emotions others avoid. Their honesty becomes a quiet challenge. Can you meet me here? Without your mask? And when someone can't or won't, the ego begins to feel brittle. Because when a person rooted in truth invites you into realness, your own pretending starts to feel hollow. They're not fooled by power, either. A loud voice, a dominant personality, or a display of authority doesn't scare them. INFJs often sit in spaces where hierarchy and ego rule, and yet they don't flinch. They know that many of the people who shout the loudest are the ones most terrified of being truly seen. Their intuition often tells them exactly what pain, fear, or insecurity is fueling someone's arrogance. And they'll never say it outright to shame, but they will know. And the fact that they know, even silently, begins to melt the illusion. INFJs can turn the entire structure of someone's ego upside down with one softly spoken sentence. Sometimes, they'll ask a question that seems harmless, but cuts like a scalpel. Why do you feel the need to lead every conversation? Do you ever feel tired of performing? Who are you when no one's watching? These aren't attacks. They're invitations. But to the ego, they feel like fire to the paper walls it's built. And what's truly fascinating is that INFJs don't always realize they're doing it. This isn't a power trip for them. Many times, they're just trying to connect honestly. But because they operate from such depth, anyone standing on shallow foundations will feel shaken. They'll either lean into the discomfort and grow, or pull away and label the INFJ as too intense, too sensitive, or too serious. But the truth is, the INFJ wasn't the problem. They were just a mirror. An ego always hates a mirror it didn't ask for. What truly terrifies the ego is that INFJs don't need it. They don't need to be impressed. They don't need to be dominated. They don't need a performance. They only want the truth. And when someone realizes that all their strategies, charm, bravado, victimhood, control, have no effect on the INFJ, they're forced to confront the one thing they've been avoiding: their authentic self. INFJs break egos with presence, with patience, and with a truth so still and sincere that even the loudest lies cannot survive in its light. Check out our INFJ Mastery course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video.